Hi, boys and girls. I hope you're enjoying the read aloud. And we just made our way to Camp Kookooskoos. And the next chapter is called A Rescue. I was wondering what you were thinking about Applegate Skinner. Pretty interesting character, don't you think? Well, here we go. A rescue. Lewis liked to sleep on the lake, and at night, after blowing taps, he would waddle down to the sandy beach by the dock. There he removed his slate, his chalk pencil, and his trumpet and hid them under a bush. Then he shoved off into the water. As soon as he was afloat, he would tuck his head under a wing, and for a while he would doze and think about home and think about his mom and dad. Then he would think about Serena, how beautiful she was and how much he loved her. Pretty soon, though, he would be fast asleep. When daylight came, he would swim ashore and eat a light breakfast of water plants. Then he'd put on his things, climb onto the flat rock, and blow reveille. The boys, hearing the trumpet, would wake and rush to the dock to swim before breakfast. After supper, at night, the campers would often play volleyball. Lewis loved the game. He couldn't hop around as fast as the boys, but he could reach far out with his long neck and poke the ball into the air and over the net. Wow, it was very hard to get a ball past Lewis. He could return almost any shot. When the boys chose sides at the start of the game, Lewis was always the first to be chosen. The boys loved camp life in Ontario. They loved how to handle a canoe. They learned how to swim. Sam Beaver took them on nature walks and taught them to sit quietly on a log and observe wild creatures and birds. He showed them how to walk in the woods without making a lot of noise. Sam showed them where the kingfisher had his nest, in a hole in the bank by a stream. He showed them the partridge and her chicks. When the boys heard a soft coo, 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 Sam told them they were listening to the Swan owl, smallest of the owls, no bigger than a man's hand. Sometimes in the middle of the night, the whole camp would wake to the scream of a wildcat. Nobody ever saw the wildcat during the entire summer, but his scream was heard every night. One morning when Sam was playing tennis with Applegate Skinner, Sam heard a clanking noise. He looked behind him, and there, coming out of the woods, was a skunk. The skunk's head was stuck in a tin can. He couldn't see where he was going. He kept bumping into trees and rocks, and the can went clank, clank, clank. "That skunk is in trouble," said Sam, laying down his racket. "He's been to the dump looking for food, and he poked his head into that empty can, and now he can't get it off." The word spread quickly through the camp that a skunk had arrived. The boys came running to see the fun. Mr. Brickle warned them not to get too close, for the skunk might squirt them with that smelly perfume. So the boys danced around, keeping their distance and holding their noses. The big question was how to get the can off the skunk's head without getting squirted. So the dogs are barking. I'm sure you can hear them. Never a quiet moment here. The big question was how to get the can off the skunk's head without getting squirted. "He's going to need help," said Sam. "That skunk will starve to death if we don't get that can off of him." All the boys had suggestions. Many of the suggestions were just not going to work out. While everybody was making suggestions, Sam Beaver walked quietly to his tent. He returned in a few minutes with a long pole and a piece of fish line. Sam tied one end of the fish line to the pole. Then he tied a slip knot to the other end of the line and formed a noose. Then he climbed to the roof of the porch and asked the other boys not to get too close to the skunk. The skunk all this time was blundering around, blindly bumping into things. Oh, it was such a pitiful sight. Sam, holding his pole, waited patiently on the roof. He looked like a fisherman waiting for a bite. When the skunk wandered close to the building, Sam reached over, dangled the noose in front of the skunk, slipped the noose around the can, and gave a jerk. The noose tightened, and the can came off. As it did so, the skunk turned around and squirted right at Mr. Brickle, oh no, who jumped back, stumbled, and fell. Of course, all the boys danced around holding their noses, and the skunk ran off into the woods. Mr. Brickle ran off, too. He needed to dust himself off. Ugh! The smell was so strong. and Mr. Brickle smelled really, really bad. "Congratulations, Sam," said Mr. Brickle. "You have eaten a wild creature and have given Camp Kookooskoos a delicious dash of wild perfume. I'm sure we'll all remember this marvelous event for a long time to come." "I don't see how we can ever forget it." "Cuckoo!" cried Louis, lifting his trumpet. The lake echoed with the sound. The air was heavy with the rich, musky smell of skunk. The boys danced and danced around, holding their noses. "Maybe a swim will clear the air," Mr. Brickle said, as he pointed toward his cottage to change those clothes. After lunch each day, the campers went to their tents for a rest period. Some of them read books. Some wrote letters home telling their parents how bad the food was. Some just lay on their cots and talked. One afternoon during rest period, the boys in Applegate's tent began teasing him about his name. "Applegate Skinner," said one boy. "Where did you get such a crazy name like Applegate?" "Oh, my parents gave it to me." "I know what his name is," said another boy. Sour Applegate Skinner." The boys howled at this and began chanting, "Sour Applegate, Sour Applegate." Now, I don't think that was very nice. "Quiet," bellowed the tent leader. "I don't think it's funny," said Applegate. "His name isn't Sour Applegate," whispered another boy. "His name is Wormy Applegate, Wormy Applegate." This suggestion was greeted with screams of laughter. "Quiet," bellowed the tent leader. "I want quiet in this tent. Leave Applegate alone." "Leave rotten Applegate alone," whispered another boy, and some of the other boys had to pull their pillows over their heads to their snickering because they were laughing so hard. Applegate was really upset. When the rest period was over, Applegate wandered down to the lake. He didn't like being made fun of, and he wanted to do something to get even. So without saying anything to anybody, he slid a canoe into the water and paddled out into the lake, heading for the opposite shore a mile away, and no one noticed him. Applegate had no business taking a canoe out on his own. He had not passed his swimming test. He had not passed his canoe test. He was disobeying a camp rule. Even though the boys were making fun of him, this is going to be a very important part. When he was a quarter of a mile from shore in deep water, all of a sudden the wind got stronger. The waves got higher. The canoe became hard to manage. Applegate got scared, and suddenly a wave caught the canoe and spun it around. Applegate leaned hard on his paddle. His hand slipped, and he lost his balance. The canoe tipped over. Applegate found himself in the water. His clothes felt terribly soggy and heavy. His shoes dragged him down, and he could barely keep his head above the water. Instead of hanging onto the canoe, he started swimming toward shore, which was a crazy thing to do. One wave hit him square in the face, and he got a mouthful of water. "Help! Help!" he screamed. "Help me! I'm drowning! I'm drowning! Help! Help!" Counselors sprinted to the waterfront. They jumped in canoes and rowboats and started for the drowning boy. One counselor kicked his moccasins off, dove in, and began swimming toward Applegate. Mr. Brickle raced to the dock, climbed to the diving tower, and directed the rescue operations, shouting through a megaphone. "Hang on the canoe, Applegate," he shouted. "Don't leave the canoe." But Applegate had already left the canoe. He was all alone, thrashing about and wasting his strength. He felt sure he would soon go to the bottom and drown. He felt weak. He felt scared. Water had gotten into his lungs, and he couldn't last much longer. The first boat to get away from the dock was rowed by Sam Beaver, and Sam was pulling hard at the oars, straining every muscle. But things didn't look good for Applegate. The boats were still a long, long away from the boy. When the first cry of help was heard in the camp, Louis was coming around the corner of the main lodge. He spied Applegate immediately and responded to the call. "I can't fly out there," thought Applegate, "because my flight feathers have been falling out lately. But I can certainly make better time than those boats." Dropping his slate and his chalk pencil and his trumpet, Louis splashed into the water and struck out, beating his wings and kicking with his great webbed feet. A swan, even in summer when he can't fly, can scoot across the water at very high speed. Louis's powerful wings beat the air. His feet churned the waves as though he was running on top of the water. In a moment, he had passed all the boats. When he reached Applegate, he quickly dove, pointed his long neck between Applegate's legs, then came to the surface with Applegate sitting on his back. Cheers came from the people on the shore and in the boats. Applegate clung to Lewis's neck. He had been saved in the nick of time. Another minute and he would have gone to the bottom. Water would have filled his lungs and he would have been a goner. "Thank goodness," shouted Mr. Brickle. "Thank God," shouted everyone. "Great work, Lewis. Camp Kookooskoos will never forget this day. The reputation of the camp has been saved. Our record for safety is still untarnished." Lewis didn't pay much attention to all the shouting. He swam very carefully over to Sam's boat, and Sam pulled Applegate into the boat and helped him into the stern seat. "You look pretty funny riding a swan," Sam said, "and you're lucky to be alive. You're not supposed to go out on the lake alone, especially in a canoe." But Applegate was too scared and wet to say a word. He just sat and stared straight ahead, spitting water out of his mouth and breathing very hard. At supper that night, Mr. Brickle placed Lewis at his right in the place of honor. When the meal was over, he rose and made a speech. "We all saw what happened on the lake today. Applegate Skinner broke a camp rule, took a canoe out alone. He was drowning when Lewis the Swan, rapidly outdistancing all other campers, reached his side, held him up, and saved his life. Let us all give Lewis a standing ovation." "And now, Applegate," said Mr. Brickle, "I hope the rescue has caused you to change your opinion of birds. The first day you were here in camp, you told everyone you didn't like birds. How are you feeling now?" "I feel sick at my stomach," said Applegate. "It makes me sick at my stomach that I almost drowned. My stomach still has a lot of lake water in it." "Yeah, but what about the birds?" said Mr. Brickle. Applegate thought hard for a moment. "Well," he said, "I'm grateful to Lewis for saving my life, but I still don't like birds." "Really?" said Mr. Brickle. "That's quite remarkable. Even though a bird saved you from drowning, you don't care for birds. What have you got against birds?" "Nothing," said Applegate. "I have nothing against them. I just don't like them." Lewis was bestowed a beautiful medal. Engraved on it were the words, "To Lewis the Swan, who with outstanding courage and complete disregard for his own safety saved the life of Applegate Skinner." Lewis took off his slate and wrote, "Thank you for this medal. It is a great honor." But he thought to himself, "I'm beginning to get overloaded with stuff around my neck. I've got a trumpet, I've got a slate, I've got a chalk pencil, now I've got a medal. I'm beginning to look like some strange hippie. I hope I'll still be able to fly when my flight feathers grow in again." That night when darkness came, Lewis blew the most beautiful taps he had ever blown. The man who had brought the medal over, listening and watching, he could hardly believe his ears and his eyes. When he returned to the city, he told people what he had seen and heard. Lewis's fame was growing. His name was known. People all over were beginning to talk about the swan that could play a trumpet. So Lewis was bestowed a medal by a man, not Mr. Brickle. Unfortunately, I think I missed that line. I have to go back and take a look. And now the man has gone back to the city to talk to everyone about this remarkable swan that can play a beautiful trumpet. So I hope you enjoyed that chapter, and I hope that you have a great time listening to it. Okay, boys and girls, remember, I love you, miss you, and I'll talk to you soon.